So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Virginia Foreign Language Teachers Workshop Series. We are very pleased to have with us today Kathleen Shelton from the Ohio Department of Education. We're very fortunate to have Kathy here because Kathy is one of 3 national co-chairs for the revisions of the language necessitable, actual, can-do statements, and was also on the committee for the revision, or the development of the intercultural can-do statements. And so you've got a lot of knowledge and intricate information from Kathy that you may not get from any other source. And so we're very happy to have her here. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we will check those as we go along. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kathy.
All right, so hi everybody. As Lisa said, I'm from the Ohio Department of Education. Hopefully you can hear me okay right now. I see someone's typing. I hope it's not we can't hear you. Just a quick background on myself, because I do want to jump right in because we're a little bit delayed starting already. I've been at the Ohio Department of Education for 4 years. Prior to that, I taught French for 25 years. Majority of it was high school. I did teach at Ohio State University when I was in grad school, but the majority of it was teaching high school. So what we're going to do today is we have 2 hours about. So what I want to do is we're going to spend the first 45 minutes to an hour on the language can-do statements, and then the second half we'll spend on the intercultural can-do statements. So the way I thought would be easiest to work this was I put everything up on the screen as opposed to trying to give handouts and have you figure out which handout that I was referring to, and then I can send you a PDF of this PowerPoint when we're done. Okay, good. So you can hear me. Good, excellent. So as we go throughout, what I'm going to do is there'll be a lot of times where I'll say it's just a quick discussion, so you can discuss if you're in a group at your school or if you're by yourself, talk to yourself. I don't know. And you can also type comments into the box also. So with that started, or with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And like we said, I can see the chat box up here, so if you have questions at any point, just put them up there. If I'm talking too fast and it's not coming through clearly, let me know that also, because I tend to talk fast, so you sort of have to listen fast. So the first thing I always like to say when I do my workshops, and I do dozens, I've done dozens and dozens of these workshops, and this can-do workshop, this is probably about my 25th one this year. So the one thing I always like to tell teachers is what we're going to talk about today is utopia. Oh, Ocean Lakes is having trouble hearing, so you know. What we're going to talk about today is sort of the utopia of what it would look like if, okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chats. Utopia is what we're going to talk about today. This is what it would look like in a perfect world if you had 1 prep and 5 kids every day who are like, woohoo, this is the best class I ever came to. In the workshop. As we go through that, though, I always tell teachers, you always have to take back everything we're talking about to your reality and to your sanity too, because everyone has different things going on in their personal life. So everything we talk about, always remember that this is the perfect world, and then always think about, okay, what would it look like in my classroom? What would it look like with my students? Are you using?
No.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the mouse here. There we go. The other thing that, as we're talking about language proficiency and intercultural competence, is I always try to tell teachers, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I'm sure Lisa has told me that a lot of you are very up to date on the proficiency and the modes and the can-dos, etc. So as you well know, there's pretty much nothing that you have to invent from scratch anymore. You can go online to blogs, to free websites, to the actual site at the Ohio Department of Education. If you go to our website and Google or search the World Language Model Curriculum, we have hundreds and hundreds of resources for everything having to do with proficiency. I know Lisa in Virginia, they have a great website. So if you're going to start something and you're starting from scratch, before you do, Google around or search a couple other department websites and see if you can find something first. Even Teachers Pay Teachers, you can buy an IPA for $3 on Teachers Pay Teachers and edit it. So that's always my biggest recommendation, beyond making sure that you just sort of pace yourself with this, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Something's already out there. And as you pace yourself, the same thing. If this is like a major switch for you, if you're like, I'm sort of moving from a more traditional to a proficiency base, it can take 3 to 4 years to truly turn your program around, not turn it around, but to truly change your program. So that's the other thing, is to give yourself, the SMART goals. There's always the M of the measurable. When we're going through this, give yourself measurable goals, even if it's that I'm going to try and maybe just up my reading this year, and then I'm going to work on my writing next year, or I'm going to try and do more culture this year, or I'm just going to redo my level 1 this year and level 2 next year. So those are just my 3 biggest recommendations as always. Pace yourself over the next few years, depending wherever you are. Don't reinvent the wheel. Try and find things that already exist. And again, take whatever we do today and find a way to put it into your reality and your sanity. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so just really quickly, what we're going to work on today is we're going to talk about how to create learning opportunities that foster intercultural communication. We're going to talk about how to either plan lessons or enhance lessons on a cycle of noticing, comparing, reflecting, interacting to build intercultural communication. And what is, wherever you are right now in your teaching or instruction or where your students are, we want you to build from there. I don't want you to take this as I have to completely redo, or this is something new now that I have to add on top of everything else that they have going on in the state. It's always wherever you are right now. It's sort of like the I+1 of language acquisition, where you speak, the +1 is slightly above what your kids can understand. It's the same thing with today. Wherever you are, just try and take it one step above that and then one step above that. So that's just a really nice way to sort of pace yourself as you go over the next years or wherever you are in the process. The next goal is that also, once we go through this, that you can articulate to other stakeholders how the I can statements help your learners and help teachers reach their proficiency goals. Because a lot of times an administration may be like, well, where's the multiple choice test? Or I don't know what this novice high thing means, or what's proficiency, and where's the worksheets? And you have to have a good handle yourself on how to say, but this is, this is more valuable, and this is research-based, and this is how the kids grow. So by the end of that, we do like a little practice elevator speech where you can sort of work on that and see, at least if you're sort of getting a fundamental idea for this. All right, so first question I have for you, and I'm just going to give you like maybe less than a minute to talk about this, because like I said, I think this is, Lisa said this, you guys are a pretty strong group of, or you teachers are a pretty strong group. Really quickly, just with the other teachers in the room, define what's the difference between performance versus proficiency when you're doing a second language, or any world language. What's performance versus proficiency? And if you want to type in the chat box, you can do that too. So I'll give you just like 1 minute to do that. Okay, so I see one response up there that performance is what and proficiency is how well. Does anybody else have anything? Oh, here we go. So performance, what they practice in the classroom. Proficiency, what they can do spontaneously. Rehearse versus improvised conversation. Performance is one moment, proficiency forever. Those are great answers, and those are great. That's the good thing about a chat box, is you sort of have to soundbite it, which is really good, because that's what a lot of times how when we're speaking to people outside of our field, how it's nicer to be able to just give them quick sound bites. So you pretty much summed up everything that I have on my table here. So performance, it's what the learner can do in a familiar context, practice material, and number 2, the task and everything is based on whatever you're studying right now. If I'm doing a unit on health and beauty aids and reflexive verbs, or daily routines, we have practiced it over and over. And so when I give the kids lessons or assignments or an IPA, they can do it really well because they can sort of perform. They just did it. And then just as several of you typed, proficiency, number 1, what can the learner do in a spontaneous, unrehearsed context? The other thing to keep in mind is they have to be able to sustain it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're having students write an essay, or they're doing a speaking assignment, a speaking test, that you want to make sure you're getting enough language from them to make sure they can sustain it. So if you only have them write 50 or 75 words and you're trying to see, can they tell a story in the past tense? Well, any kid can pretty much spit out 50 or 75 words because they have that memorized. Give them an essay. Like when I was doing my students, it was, by the end of level 1, they had to write 150 words when they did an essay. Level 2, they had to write 200 words, and level 3, 4, and AP, they had to write at least around 250 to 300 or above, because I wanted to make sure if I read the first page, yeah, it was really pretty good, but when I went to the second page where they had said everything they already knew, and now they were no longer speaking with what they memorized, they had to see what they could sustain, that's where I knew where they really were. Same thing if you give a speaking test. I was a big fan, if I couldn't do it live, I was a big fan of Google Voice, because Google Voice makes a 3-minute voicemail. And I told my students, you have to talk the whole 3 minutes, because, kids can spit out what they know. And then they have 2 minutes left and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to talk for 2 more minutes. That's where you see what they can sustain. So keep that in mind when you're giving writing and conversations. If you're doing one-on-one conversations, I always had a timer. And if it was one-on-one with me, we had a 3-minute conversation. If it was a group of kids, it was usually 5 or 6 minutes, because you truly want to see what can they sustain when you're trying to go beyond just what have they practiced and memorized. Number 2, as you probably already know, even though they didn't necessarily put it, I don't think I saw it come in the chat box, is it's based on real world situations, authentic resources, which, as you know, are resources made by native speakers for native speakers. And there is nothing wrong with using textbook exercises, especially if you have a lot of teachers and you're like, we all sort of use a textbook to stay, with the same scope and sequence. There's nothing wrong with practicing with textbook exercises, because some are decent and they often have good ideas for culture and native speakers. My recommendation then is take what's in the textbook and then go on Google Images or search Google French or Google Spanish or whatever. Go on YouTube and see if you can find a related video or infographic or article or weather report that's an authentic one made by native speakers. Because the more your students are exposed to the authentic language, the better they're going to be. And because face it, when they leave your classroom, nobody's giving them something that's been, has contextualized vocab or has a little asterisk with what the definition is. They're pretty much on their own. So if we only stick to the resources in the book or things that we've constructed ourselves, we're sort of doing a disservice to our students once they leave the classroom. The third thing is, if you look on the chart, performance is usually the end of a chapter or unit of study, which sort of goes with number 1 and 2. And number 3, proficiency is usually more holistic. It's usually on a semester exam, a final exam, a comprehensive presentation that they're doing. If you have, do they call them SLOs here in Virginia?
No.
Oh, okay, some sort of pre and post. Do you guys have something like that?
No, we did call them SLGs.
SLGs, okay, we had to do
Different
students,
state, yeah.
different state, but probably the same premise. But anytime you're trying to do some sort of more extended task or something more comprehensive, that's when we're truly looking at proficiency. And like I said, if you have any questions as we're going, please type them in the chat box and I'll help you out. All right. Oops. Not moving here. Let's try it again. There we go. This is just a quick visual that's really nice to see. And it may even be something good to show your students. And that is, performance is basically the students start down here. Performance is where we're practicing, and they can, they can put those direct object pronouns in front of every verb that's out there, and they can, conjugate those verbs like a champion. And then proficiency sort of drops a little bit. It's what they actually remember. So keep that in mind also if you're like, because I know I was always frustrated, like, oh my gosh, the direct object pronouns, at least for like French and Spanish and other, I'm not sure the other languages, was always that killer. It's like we practice these and practice these and practice these, and why can't they remember them? Well, they can't remember them because number 1, it's really an advanced level skill or intermediate high, but 2, because it's proficiency and they can remember it in the unit, but not on the final exam. That's okay. They'll keep building as they go there. So I just think this is a nice visual to sort of keep in mind yourself when you're like, why aren't the kids learning it? And they are. They're just, they're doing performance versus proficiency. why is this important? And this is sort of maybe, you know, part of your elevator speech or that you might want to sort of take notes on, is the number one thing is that students show how well they communicate using any language they've acquired. It doesn't matter if it was from a cartoon or that they're doing video games or they watch YouTube or they're doing, you know, chat rooms, texting with friends, Facebook, whatever. It doesn't matter. However they've acquired that language, that's where they're getting their proficiency. The best thing, and this changed everything for me in the classroom, is when I started focusing on what the students know and can do, and I didn't even pay attention to what they couldn't do, it changed everything. Because if you think about if your student goes to the target culture or they interact with native speakers from that country, it doesn't matter what they don't know, because all that matters is what they can do. So if all they can get out is a 2-word phrase, I always sort of told my students, if you know, it doesn't matter if you're French 4 or AP and you can, you know, write these 500-word essays. If you go to Paris and you fall down and you break your leg and the only thing you can get out in French is knee, leg, hospital, guess what? You're going to get to the hospital and they're going to fix your leg. It ain't pretty what you're saying, but if you always focus on what do you know and what you can do, and if you don't know what to do, how are we going to get around it? How are you going to circumlocute? How are you going to use gestures at the lower level? How am I going to come up with something else? So when you focus and you assess them based on what they can do and just ignore what they can't do, it sort of changes everything. It relieves the kids because they realize I don't have to know everything. And it sort of gives you a break too, because you're not trying to tell what you did wrong. You're just saying, this is what you can do right, and let's build to the next step. So that's just a huge, huge, huge thing. And like I said, when I sort of wrap my brain around that, it just changed everything for me. Number 3 is also very important because this comes up pretty much every time I do a workshop, and I'm sure it may be going through your minds right now, is that we want culturally appropriate interaction. We want communication that's culturally appropriate, but we can't forget about accuracy and grammatical accuracy. And the way I like to tell teachers to think about this is that your novice learners, who are for the typical languages, level 1 and 2, I know for Chinese, Japanese, Russian, your kids take a little bit longer to get through novice. When the students are speaking at the novice level, the things they talk about, the topics they talk about tend to be related to me, things I'm familiar with, things in my daily life, my family, my friends, my activities. They're all very familiar, common topics, and they're not very complex ideas. Grammatical accuracy is not as important at the novice level tasks, because even if they say, for example, in Spanish, they're trying to say my dad is tall, and they say mi padre es alta, yes, they messed up the adjective ending, but whoever's talking to them knows that they're saying my dad is tall. So yes, the accuracy, it didn't really impede the message because they were talking about their dad and people know what they were saying. So in the novice levels, I'm not saying totally blow off grammar because you don't want them to fossilize errors, but and you know, if you're working on it in performance, yes, you know, we're working on adjective ending, so I'm going to focus on it with you in class. But then when you give the IPA or you do more of a proficiency assessment, you can let up a little bit on the grammatical accuracy and you focus on, did they do the message? If they were supposed to tell me about their family, how well and how comprehensible was their message about the family? Now, as they move up into intermediate and advanced, which is, you know, like your AP kids can get up to advanced low usually, or immersion can get a little bit higher, accuracy becomes more important because the tasks become more complex. So if they're practicing writing a college essay that says, tell about an event in your childhood that was important to you, and they're using the future tense instead of the past tense, yes, now their grammatical accuracy has just totally, completely confused whoever they're writing to. Or they're trying to give a complex thing like I'm trying to cut, you know, Lisa here with me is always doing YouTube videos on how to fix her plumbing or how to fix her dryer. And those are complex directions. And if I'm messing up my vocab or my grammatical accuracy, Lisa is not going to be able to fix her dryer or her plumbing or her refrigerator or her roof or whatever Lisa's doing. So keep that in mind, that grammar and accuracy is not as important at the lower levels, but the higher and more complex you get, the more accurate the grammar. And I hate to just say grammar, it's really just accuracy and vocabulary, grammatical accuracy in general. So, and the best way to be able to do that is if you're grading with rubrics, that's how you get away from taking off, you know, they made 7 errors, so I'm going to take off 5 points or something. So I just want to stress that because we're not in the room together, so it's hard sometimes to know if that comes up or not. So grammatical accuracy, don't blow off the grammar. Drill and kill is fine, and Quizlet, vocab, and all that. That's all fine when you're doing the formative assessment. The goal is the grammar and the vocab and all that, all those performance type things. Those are formative assessments that are leading the kids to proficiency, because it sort of gives them the muscle memory to get where they want to be with their proficiency. But the ultimate goal is, did you accomplish the message? And how accurate you are determines where you are on the proficiency scale. So I hope that's clear. It's sort of hard. I feel like I'm sort of talking in a vacuum, but I hope that's sort of clear. Okay, really quickly, just 1 minute with the people around you. Talk about, and if you want to type in the chat box too, that's helpful for me. When you're doing interpretive communication, when they're reading something or listening, or I don't know if we have any ASL people on here, if they're viewing something, what should they be doing when they're reading or listening or viewing? So talk amongst yourselves for about a minute, or you can put in the chat box too. I just have some people walk in, so I won't be speaking quite as much in a vacuum. Okay, so I see those of you who just came in, we're talking about interpretive communication right now. So I see that you're getting the meaning, the basic message. Just don't block the screen. No word, it's not word for word understanding, patterns, exactly. Sometimes they need notes, visuals, or others who have different reading levels. Right, those are all great ideas. I see someone else typing. Let's see what else is going on. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide as you're still typing. You see it?
Sorry,
Yeah,
no,
probably
I
you're going to be on camera if you sit behind.
Exactly.
All right, listening for the overall message, doing something with it, engaging with the text, checking for understanding. Exactly. Interpretive communication is basically, number one, can you get the whole picture? Can you get the main idea? Just number versus translating or hunting for trivial details. If you want them to look for details, the point is why. If they're looking at a menu and you say, what do they serve on Wednesday? What do they serve on Friday? What vegetables do they serve? Who cares? What's the purpose? But if they're looking at a menu and you say, you're gluten-free, what days are you going to be able to eat in the cafeteria? Or, they're looking at the camp brochure and you say, you really like sports, which of these 5 camping trips are you going to pick? So if you ask them to look for details, have a reason why. You're on the weight team or you're on the wrestling team and you need to put on 10 pounds in a week. Which days of the week are you going to eat, or what foods are you going to eat? So have them have a reason for looking for details. Don't just have them answer who, what, where, when, why without a reason for looking for those details. Number 2, very important, is to help kids, and this is just a good literacy skill, help them learn to understand new words based on context versus giving them vocab lists, because you know that is a key skill. If you're having a conversation with a native speaker or reading a text on your own, it's number 1 to figure out, do I even need to know what this word is? And that's someone just from Prince William, I saw you just did the same thing. Yeah, if the word is used once in there, maybe I can get by without knowing that word. But if I see the word used in there 5 or 6 times, yeah, I'm probably going to have to figure out what that means. And that's a skill that you have to help them develop, or we have to, not just you. Number 3, very important, especially as we start talking about culture, is what's the author's point of view and what's the cultural context versus only my point of view. And that's in the second hour when we look at the intercultural can-dos. We're going to talk a lot about that, because if they're reading, in Spanish about the quinceañera, excuse my pronunciation, they may be like, big deal, who cares about the 15th birthday? Well, guess what? Some kid down in Mexico saying 16th birthday, who cares? So that they understand why is it important and what do I have that relates to it, etc. So like I said, we'll do a little bit more with that second half. And then when you're giving them some sort of IPA, a summative assessment, have them rephrase or retell or summarize or predict. Just although if you talk with your ELA teacher, your language arts teacher, What are they doing in their classes? Because that's the same thing we're doing in our classes. We're sharing the same skills. Reading or translating word for word, there's nothing wrong with doing that as an exercise in and of itself. You know, we're working on a certain grammatical topic, so I want you to look at this and find where it's used or whatever. Nothing wrong with doing that like in a formative or some sort of practice. But when you're actually assessing their interpretive communication, that's when you want to go to that more holistic literacy skills. Okay, let's keep going to the next mode. So just about a minute, and you in the room here can sort of talk amongst yourselves also. When the kids are having a conversation, what does a good conversation really look like? So chat amongst yourselves, put some answers in the text box, and we'll sort of chat, so you guys here can sort of chat too. So what's a good conversation look like or sound like?
I think it's focused on like a genuine, relatable topic, just like you're talking about, like using this way for wrestling, right? That's something that they can actually talk about for more than a minute and feel engaged in. So I think an engaged, relatable topic.
Think about when you have a conversation with a friend. What does that conversation
I guess something that's like natural and doesn't seem like it's mechanical.
Right.
Something like that.
Right, like if it's not scripted, they kind of have to
Yeah.
do a sheet.
Right. Yeah. Good. I see some good answers up on the screen. Right. You're bouncing back and forth. It's not just me asking questions and you answering. It's two-way. Very good. Asking questions, negotiating, meaning, spontaneous. Those are huge. It's not just you ask, hey, what'd you do this weekend? I had lunch with the president. Oh, what'd you do? Oh, I went to the movies. And there's no reaction to anything that the other person said. They can confirm the information. They create with language. So you're like, I went to the movies. Oh, what did you see? Oh, I saw this. Oh, I love that type of movie, or I hate that type of movie. Exactly. Intuitive, responsive, authentic interjections. This is great. Personalized, someone in the room just said the same thing here, that it's personalized for the lower level so they can relate to it. If I've got a classroom full of, level 1, and I've got 25 freshman boys in there, we're not going to talk about prom probably. We're going to talk about what, do they like sports or, and that's where like one of those sort of surveys before on the first day of school starts. What do you like to talk about? And then bring it in so they can relate to it. Yeah, follow-up questions to what the other person said. These are all great. Exactly. I think you probably covered everything on my slide. So yeah, it's two-way, spontaneous. It is not memorized. If you're doing a memorized dialogue with someone, that's a presentation. That's just a skit. Now, if you have two kids doing a skit and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, you sit down and you jump in, now it turns into a conversation. That's actually not a bad exercise, especially with your older students to do. Monitoring your partner's comprehension. So if I'm talking, I'm here and I'm talking to Lisa or whomever, and Lisa's got this look on her face like, I don't understand a word you're saying, and I just keep going blah, 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 and just ignore her. That's not good. I'm not being a very good conversation partner. Using body language, eye contact. Kids all they do now is they text, which texting is interpersonal conversation too. Email is interpersonal. It doesn't always have to be oral. So let them do some interpersonal writing. Have them email each other back and forth or text each other back and forth and then screenshot it and send it to you and grade it as an interpersonal writing. So it doesn't always have to be a spoken conversation. Also, on the other hand, ask for clarification if needed. If I don't know what you're saying, then I do say, wait, I don't understand. The thing to keep in mind is these conversational skills are not something natural nowadays to teenagers anyway, or little, younger kids because of technology. So this may entail one day or, use your 10% non-target language in the class and say, come up and show me what it look like in English and what's a bad conversation look like in English, and go over those skills, because you know how it is, once they get caught up in the language, they are so focused on, oh my gosh, what's the word for where do you live and stuff, they forget all about the conversational skills. So conversation is a skill that we really have to work with them over and over. Do conversations as a whole class. Let's work together on one in practice, and now do one with a partner where it's not graded. So scaffold the conversational skills the same way you would scaffold language. Gesturing, right? Yeah, gesturing can get you a lot. If in a freeze situation, like I said earlier about the hospital thing, if all I can do is point to my leg and say, grunt, someone's going to take me somewhere and they're going to fix my leg. And then I can get in the emergency room and be like, what's the past reflexive verb and which pronoun do I use with whatever. All right, really quick, about a minute with your group. When the students are doing writing or speaking or signing and presentational, what does it look like? What do you expect a good presentation to look or sound like? And you can chat here too, and you can put answers in the box again. So for you, when you guys are, if you have a student who's writing or speaking or signing at the ASL, what do you expect from them?
I expect what them to be saying or what them to be doing to actually reflect their own personality, instead of being someone who's kind of does.
Exactly, right, so put their own voice in it.
I think maybe a form of presentational too is like having thought beforehand and prepared,
Right.
right? So it's not, there's not a lot of or things like that, right? It's kind of a practice thing.
Yeah, yeah, it is, it can be practiced. Okay, I'm starting to look up on the screen. So not asking questions, exactly. It's not, this isn't a conversation like I'm doing my presentation, all of a sudden, oh, hey, teacher, comment dit-on, or comment se dit, or how do you say this word? No, you should have practiced it. You may do follow-up questions at the end, but while you're doing your presentation, it's a one-way presentation. You're confident. Someone in here said it has your personal voice in it. You're not just reading in a monotone. Let's see, where are we? Oops. I think I scrolled down, sorry. Using their own voice, confidence, increased accuracy, right? As you move up the scale, are you more accurate about it? And remember, presentations in general, like when you look at the can-dos and the proficiency, that's based on a prepared presentation, but it doesn't mean it can't be spontaneous. It can't be, your final exam is you have to sit with me for 3 minutes and just tell me about your family. So keep in mind, if you're assessing them with a rubric, your expectation for something that's prepared are going to be a lot different than your expectations for something that they haven't had a chance to prepare. Good, creating with the language, building, using different parts together. Excellent. Okay, let's keep going here because I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock and I want to make sure we get to the can-dos. All right, so I think we pretty much hit everything up there. Number 3, don't forget about, again, the cultural background and the level of formality of the audience. If I'm doing an interview, it's going to sound a lot different when I'm talking about myself than if I'm just meeting a new friend or something. Okay. Let's keep going here. All right, what are the can-do statements for communication? So let's dig into this. And we're going to pull them up in a minute and look at them. So the can-do statements, as Lisa mentioned, and some of you came in late, were developed, it's been a while since they've been developed, and they've gone through a couple iterations, and we just finished the most final iteration, just released them in October. Lisa Harris here, we were the co-chairs of the task force with ACRL to create these. So we have intimate knowledge. We've spent hundreds of hours and about 1 year working on these can-do statements. So basically, the purpose of them is that they deconstruct the communication standard of 3 modes of interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. It's communicative interaction with authentic language. The can-do statements are actually, as we look at the low, mid, and high of each level, are actually performance-based example that they show how you grow towards proficiency. And also the key thing with the can-dos is they are not a curriculum, they are a framework. They don't say this is what you teach. They say, based on what you have taught, where does your student fall in here? And that's where they are within proficiency. Okay, let's keep going. Why do we need them? Why do we use them? And we sort of talked about this a little bit. And that's, as I'm sure you're well versed in, if you have Lisa as your state leader, I'm sure you're well versed in the paradigm shifts in language. So it used to be sort of learning about language. Here's the grammar, here's the vocab, here's how language works. And then we move more to a communicative approach that we want to interact with each other, etc. We're even going beyond that now, and we're really going to assessing content through language. So it's not just, if I'm teaching, I want to do a food unit, it's not just teaching food, but I'm throwing in health, and I'm talking about my personal diet, and I'm using content, I'm reading up on hunger and poverty. And so it's not just talking about communication, just about the language or an easy topic, it's also learning new information. Easy in an immersion class, but definitely cannot be forgotten in a typical language classroom. All right, also the evolution of teaching culture, which we're going to do the second part of this. Okay, so they gain knowledge and understanding of culture, to the students interact in culturally appropriate ways, to we actually are building relationships. And we'll talk about that more when we look at the culture can-dos. All right, how do we use them? So if you have a computer handy, you can pull up, if you go to acl.org/global_statements, that's where the can-do statements are housed right now. I'm going to look at my next slide. I can see myself if I'm pulling them up or fun. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the site so I can show you. Oops, actually, we already had it pulled up, didn't we? That's all right. It's right here. Okay, you can switch me over. Okay. They can or cannot see this. They cannot see this. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I didn't know. Oh, go ahead, sorry. I forgot we have to. There we go. Okay. They can see that screen? Yes. Okay. All right. So when you're on this page for the can-do statements, if you scroll down, and I'm not telling you to scroll past this. In reality, we want you to read all this because it's the introduction. And especially this right here, how to use and how not to use the can-do statements, very important. But as you scroll down, you can see all these orange boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pull up this one right here. I believe it's the one that says print on 11 by 17, where it's the novice to distinguished benchmarks and indicators. And I actually need to go back. So I'm going to have you go ahead and pull up this page on. This is the page I'm on if you have a personal computer, but I'm actually going to go back. I need to go back to my screen because I have some things pointed out. But if you're on your own computer, like a laptop, this is what we're going to be looking at. Actually, we're going to be looking at the page right after it on page 2. But I'm going to have her looking back to my screen. All right, so I'm going to actually go to my next slide. All right, so you on your laptop may be looking at this page. If not, you can just look on my screen up here. Hopefully it's big enough for you to see. It's a little bit small on mine, but I'm hoping it's a little bit bigger. If I do that, I probably can't see this chat box, right? If I
Yeah, it'll be bigger for you,
but not for anyone. Oh, not for anyone else.
but not for anyone.
Okay. Okay, they can expand theirs. Okay, yeah, you might want to make it bigger. So, but as you're looking on page 4 of that 11 by 17 document, you'll notice that the top of the document gives the mode of communication. For example, this is presentational. We even made little icons because these are very text heavy. They're very text dense. So each one has its own icon in the top. We're trying to, so you can see it's presentational. The next line you'll see is the proficiency benchmark. So, and there, we only took the 5 major proficiency benchmarks. So when I'm working with my novice levels, across novice, low, mid, and high, this is my goal of where I want them to be. And like I said, I can't read it from where I'm sitting, so I can't get the word for word, but you can see it's about familiar topics, using words, phrases, simple sentences, with signs spoken and, or this was, that was interpretive, I'm sorry, or no, that's the, no, okay, with signs spoken and written language, etc. So that's your proficiency benchmark. That's based on the actual proficiency descriptors. What you'll see next then is you'll see these 3 language functions, and we did this to help teachers sort of organize their assessment better if they're using these to sort of guide instruction, or kids are using it, etc. So you can see, for example, in the presentational, how do I present information to narrate about my life experiences and events? How do I present information to give a preference opinion to build towards an argument? And they sort of build up what, as you would go through novice through advanced and superior. And then how can I present information to inform, describe, or explain? So as you go through the interpretive, the presentational, and the interpersonal, you'll see each one of them has these 3 sort of essential functional questions, which I think are very, very helpful, because it shows the teacher that sometimes you get in a rut that all the kids do is have conversations about preferences, or all they do is they talk about their life, and you realize, there's more to it. And like I said, these are based on the same as the literacy, Common Core, the goals, standards, etc. for ELA. Then within each of the benchmarks, you have the 3 sub-levels of low, mid, and high. And those are actually your performance that shows how you are progressing within the proficiency level. So the 3 sub-levels are truly performance. This is what the kids can do with practice when they're in a familiar situation, and they will target how your student actually grows towards the proficiency level. So that's sort of key. So that's basically how the document is set up when you look at it. We try to really start high and you break it down. So if you have any questions about the setup, go ahead and put them in the chat box. Are you in here? Are you okay? Is that pretty straightforward with how they work? Okay, good. All right, now I sort of mentioned this on the previous one. The can-do statements have 3 functions for each mode and sublevel. So this is sort of what you'll see on that document. So under interpretive, it's what can I understand, interpret, or analyze in authentic. Notice that it's authentic informational texts, and that means spoken or written. So if they're listening to a video, and the spoken language is also called the text. We're not just talking about written. fictional text, which is your literature or anything made up, and also when I'm listening to a conversation or discussion that I'm not a part of. So I'm watching a play and they're having a conversation, or I'm watching an interview on TV, what can I understand? So those are the three sort of functional questions for interpretive. Interpersonal, when I'm in a conversation, how can I exchange information and ideas? How can I meet my needs or address situations like that may have a complication? Or how can I express and react to and support preferences and opinions? So sort of what we talked about earlier. And then for the presentational, how can I present information, as we just looked at, to narrate, to give a preference, building toward an argument, or inform, describe, or explain. So this is sort of a good, if you have a camera there and you're taking screenshots, this is just a nice way to summarize. These are all the different functions that your students and your learners will be doing with language. Okay. What I want you to do now within your group, and in this group, I'm not sure if you can see them closely enough or not. I don't know if we might make the screen bigger just for a minute while we're in here. What I want you to do in your group is I just want you to focus. You can see I've sort of grayed out these areas. I want you to just focus on the novice low through advanced low, because most of us teaching K-12, if that's where most of you are, and even into university level, we're getting up to the advanced low. And what I want you to do is I want you just as a group to go through each of the three modes and talk about what are the key words that show progression. So when I'm in the interpretive mode, or I'm sorry, I want you to do it for all three modes. I only have the presentational up here. So when I'm in the presentational mode, how do I grow in my language as I go across? When I'm in the interpretive mode, what are the key words that show how I grow? And when I'm in the interpersonal, how do I grow? So I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock, but just pick out what are the key words that tell how I grow. Probably for us, I'm going to actually it's probably easier. Well, we can do this one presentational. Can you?
How do you want it?
It may be better to go back to the web page. Yeah, I think that way we can pull it up. We can keep expanding, so because otherwise, if you don't have your laptop, it's hard to see it.
Oh, you wanted the actual web.
You have to stop sharing the screen.
For some reason.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, this one. Thank you. So can I make the screen bigger? Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, I got it. I can find my mouse. There we go. Okay, so let's have you take a look at it here with me. So we'll start with the interpretive right here. So we're just going to do, actually, there's over. Let me make it even bigger for you. Okay, so as you're looking at the interpretive, what are the key words, like as you go across the levels? What are the key words that show the difference as you grow? So starting in low, like what are your key words in low? Okay, identify, right? Yes, familiar, memorized, right? Gestures, visuals, etc. Okay, what about mid? How does it grow into mid?
Facts and phrases.
Right, we've gone from just words to facts and phrases, exactly. Okay, how about into the high?
Topics.
We've gone now to the topic
Sentences.
and sentences, right? Exactly. Okay, what about into intermediate low?
Related information.
Yeah, now we're going into not just the topic, but some related information, still in sentences for the most part. What about mid? Yeah, straightforward text. So now we can go in longer text. It's main idea now along with key information, so it's not just food, but it's like, we're talking about GMOs or something like that. Okay, what about high? What changes in that one? Yeah, I can pretty much get the main message that's going on. Descriptive language, and what about our type of, how long is our language now? Yeah, now I can, before no matter what you gave me, I can start with words, but now I can actually understand paragraph. You give me a 5-paragraph article, I can get meaning in paragraphs, not just words. And then into low, what do you notice on that one? What changes on that one? Right, the underlying message, and what else? Details, right? And we're getting into more time frames now, so so I can pretty much negotiate all the different time frames, okay? So let's scroll down to interpersonal. So on this one, what in the novice low, so when we're having conversations, what's going on in the novice low? You'll start to see a pattern, actually.
Simple questions.
You got familiar topics, simple questions, right? What about the mid? Right, exactly. The first one, you're pretty much just answering, and now I'm actually asking same thing, words, phrases, sentences. How about as we go into high?
Original questions.
Right, I'm starting to make up my own questions now, exactly, okay? Moving into sentences. What about low?
Asking for follow-up questions.
Yeah, now we're starting to build in follow-up questions. How about mid? Yeah, now we're actually exchanging more information. Yeah, and what about the topics? How do the topics go? Yeah, now I'm getting into research. So it's not just stuff I already know or have studied. How about into the high?
Discussion.
Right, it's discussion. What type of language are you using? Yeah, you're starting to speak in next sentences, paragraphs, et cetera. Time frames start to build in, and then, yeah, and then into low. Our topics start to get more complex, exactly. Okay, and then presentation will pretty much follow. It's pretty much the same thing without the questions. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to switch back to other one. I'm not sure in your groups how far you got with that, but I'm just going to ask you sort of to type in the chat box, maybe whoever's running it. Across the novice, they sort of, regardless of the mode that you were on, when you were in novice low, what were sort of the key words that talk about what type of language or what type of topics does a novice low deal with? If you could just type those in the chat box. So what type of language do they understand or use, and what type of topics? Right, family, school, things about themselves. What type of language do they use? Right, exactly. Memorize, practice words, phrases, self-interest. Excellent. What happens when they move into the mid? What's the change as they move into the mid? Right, we go into simple sentences, familiar topics, simple phrases. And by familiar topics, identification, right? By familiar topics, you'll notice the can-do say familiar and everyday topics. Everyday topics are things that everyone's familiar with. Like if you talk about shopping, or you talk about your daily routine, or I talk about family, those are everyday topics. A familiar topic means something that either they're familiar with from real life or within the classroom. So if you have spent time talking about the environment is now a familiar topic to your students. So familiar doesn't mean that they're familiar with it from their personal life. It means that they have now been exposed to it in the classroom. So especially for like immersion or something, it can become something familiar if they've been exposed to it, right? What happens in novice high? Oh, we're into someone jumped up in intermediate in mid. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, novice high. There we go. Simple sentences still. As we go into intermediate, yeah. So novice, they start sort of list words, phrases, simple sentences. Exactly. As we move into intermediate, what starts to change? They're starting to use, someone wrote up there, create simple sentences. As they start going to intermediate high, they can start writing or doing paragraphs, right? They're starting to string their sentences together. They're using transition words. How are their topics changing? So we had started with familiar and everyday. What else is going on with the topics now as they move across the intermediate range? Right, from familiar to a variety, and then keep going. How does it keep growing in intermediate? The topics. Building on novice, personal to global, connections between the themes. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, the more abstract. Yeah, so there's sort of, as you can see, as they go through intermediate, It's familiar, it goes to concrete, it goes to research. So now it's not just things I've learned, but it's things that I started researching on my own. And then as they move into the advanced, that's where they start getting away from the concrete and moving into the abstract. So keep that in mind also when you're addressing topics with your students, that don't jump too far into the abstract if they haven't really mastered the concrete. A couple things I want to talk about with the interpersonal, and I want to mention on the interpretive. On the interpersonal, in the novice low, what's going on as far as questions in novice low interpersonal? Exactly, it's questions, right? And they're in novice low, notice they're only answering the questions. I mean, they may be able to get out a, como te llamas, or, ça va, or, I can't think of my German off the top of my head exactly. Yeah, but novice low, for the most part, it's me asking them a question and they're answering the question, and they might be able to get a quick one out. Then as they moved up, right, as they move up, it's rehearsed, it's memorized chunks of questions. When do they actually start creating their own questions? What level do they actually start creating their own questions? Right, novice high to intermediate low is when they actually start creating. So, and that's where, but that doesn't mean, and I like the person who put up their memorized chunks, because if you just teach them, who, what, where, when, why, yes, that's very helpful. But if you teach them the question, where do you live? All of a sudden, they're going to go like, oh, wait, I can say, where do you live? Where do you ride your bike? Where do you study? Where do you do this? Where do you eat? Where do you skate? And that's how they start to create with language. So I love the chunks of language is the huge thing, because that's where you can get in, because they can't handle a lot of complex grammar at that level, but they can memorize like champions at novice level. I mean, so instead of just giving them flashcards with words, give them chunks of language. Heck, I mean, if you think about it, day one in Spanish and French, they're learning je m'appelle. You got a spelling change verb that's reflexive with a, an M apostrophe. You got a pronoun that's a reflexive pronoun in front of the verb, or the reciprocal pronoun in front of the verb. They're using complex grammar on the first day of, I can speak for French and Spanish, and they didn't learn anything about conjugation. So you can teach them the subjunctive in level one. You can teach them it's necessary. You're teaching chores. You can teach them it's necessary that you do. Il faut que tu fasses. And all they have to do is fill in a verb at the end of it. They're using the subjunctive right there without even understanding it. Then as they start creating and going up at the higher level, that's when we start, that's why I was talking about that grammatical accuracy. Grammar is not as important because you can teach it as memorized chunks of language. Same thing with the questions. Give them a big bank of memorized questions to start with, and then they can start creating. Because questions are hard, at least in French. You got that whole esca thing going on, and the inversion and the extra T in the middle, and it's complicated for them to do it. But they say all the time, quel ton fait-il? And they're using inversion right there and all that, and the liaison with the T and everything. So help them have memorized chunks of language first, because that's what they'll use as a foundation to create with. The other thing I want to mention is the interpretive can-dos is, and I keep, you switch, actually I can probably, okay, yeah, switch me back to the internet really quick. If you have the interpretive can-dos, I'm actually going to pull them up on the screen. Because these, the interpretive can-dos were the hardest ones for us to write, because normally when you look at a literacy standard, your comprehension is judged by what you produce. But the interpretive can-dos can't have anything to do with production, because those are our presentational can-dos. So this group had a very, very tough job to write. I wasn't on that group. Lisa and I were the presentational. We took the easy group. But I want to show you something in interpretive, because I want to make sure we're very clear on it. When you look at the interpretive, for example, in the low, in the mid, and the high, the low says I can identify memorized or familiar words, gestures, visuals. I can identify basic facts from memorized words and phrases. I can identify isolated facts from simple sentences. This does not mean that you only give them words or simple sentences or phrases. That means no matter what, you could give them, a 10-page article, you could give them a headline. The only way they're going to make meaning from it and comprehend it is they're going to start by picking out words they know, and then phrases they know, and then sentences they know, and then they're going to be able to sort of get related information, and then I'm going to start understanding paragraph length. So I want to be very clear that this is not saying that they can only read texts that are composed of simple words and sentences. It's whatever you give them video-wise or whatever, it is based on this is how they're going to make meaning from it. So because we don't want to wait, because remember I mentioned before that the can-dos tell what they can successfully do. So if I want, you know, by the end of level 4, I want you to get the main message in various time frames in paragraph length informational texts, that means I've got to be working on that way back here. That doesn't mean I wait till intermediate high to teach it. That means I'm done teaching it when they're at intermediate high. So I want to be very, very clear on that, because as we've presented the can-dos, a lot of people have looked at it and said, but wait, so we only give them words and sentences at novice, and we're like, no, that you give them whatever you want to give at whatever level. That's how they make meaning. So I just want to make sure that that one was clear. Okay, we're going to switch back. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. I know I'm sort of talking fast and it's a lot on here. We're going to switch back to the screen. I have what's your name again? Taylor over here is my jumping back and forth. Okay, good. All right, let's keep going. So hopefully that at least though gives you an idea of the overview of the can-dos. I like to give this visual. I mean, you've all seen the pyramid, but I think this is a nice visual also. That when we were writing the can-dos, there's two big things which we actually all just talked about, and that's the text type, which is the type of language, whether it's words or phrases or time frames or simple sentences, etc. And then there's the context. So this page just sort of gives you basically a summary of what we talked about. Novice learners use words, phrases, moving to simple sentences. So that's your little blue circle in the middle. Intermediate moves to series of connected sentences. Advanced moves up to paragraphs. And then after that, you know, it gets more as the superior and distinguished. It's just more the complexity of the tasks. Novice, me, my life, familiar, everyday. Intermediate, familiar, some research, concrete. If I'm having a conversation, I can deal with familiar situations, but now I can add in a complication. I'm buying a ticket, a movie ticket, which is very familiar, but all of a sudden they're like, wait, you don't have enough money, or you forgot your ID. Now all of a sudden I have a complication. That's intermediate. Advanced, now we get into unfamiliar, concrete, time frames, and then we move into abstract. I always tell teachers a good way to visualize it. You have the period or the pyramid, but I also tell, you know, think of each of these as this little nuclei, you know, two nuclei in the middle. And the novice is right here, and the higher they get, your language and your text type and your context just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So they're starting at the circle, and we just try and keep building their language on from that circle. Okay, I know I'm a little behind on my time, but I lost my cursor again. There we go. I got two screens, so I can hang on. Question. When giving more advanced text to students and asking them to identify things they know, as you mentioned, how do you see that working in elementary world language setting? My students' vocabulary and ability and proficiency is so low, I worry about discouraging them. This is not immersion, or you're talking about just a regular world language class, right? I'm assuming you don't mean immersion. And this is something that's key. When you give your students texts, there's two different things that you're doing. Are you trying to have them use the text for the reason? Right, okay, so a weekly Spanish class, which makes it even tougher, right? There's two different types of text. So I can give you a text that really is, I want you to comprehend it for the reason that it was actually intended to be comprehended. If I give you a weather map with a bunch of visuals and just a few words, or I give you an easy weather report, you're going to understand the weather using words, but that was the intent of this. I know it was sunny and it was hot, and so I know what to wear, so I can understand it. If you're giving them more complex texts, that's a little bit different, because your lower level kids, and it doesn't matter if it's an elementary class or it's a level 1 or 2 class, if I have an article that is an opinion article about, you know, GMOs or healthy food versus unhealthy food, or something about poverty or the environment, that's a complicated meaning for that text. If I give that to my novice and they start picking out, oh yeah, I see the word like weather, or I see global warming, or I see this, they're starting to get the topic and the basic facts, but they have not understood that text for the reason for which it was intended until they are actually at the level that they can fully comprehend the text. So for your little kiddos, you don't want to give them something that's so high above them that you're right, they're going to be so discouraged they're never going to understand it. But what your little kiddos can understand is they can understand a weather map. They can understand an infographic. They can understand, you pull up a website with school supplies, and you say, you know, what school supplies do you need for math class? How much does it cost? So you have to think about your kids, and you have to see the reason that you're giving an advanced text. If you're only meeting with them weekly, an advanced text could truly be something for them. Advanced, not necessarily proficiency, but something that's complex for them. Could be a web page with clothing and prices, and I can work on the colors. So think about the reason that you're giving them the text. Is it to truly understand the purpose of the text, or is it to build them to something more complex? I don't know if that helps or not, and if it doesn't, add more to it, but I think you want to look at your kids, because you certainly don't want to discourage them, especially if they're only meeting with you weekly. You want to make sure it goes back to that I+1 in this situation. This is what they can know. I'm going to do it a little bit above. And when they can do that +1, okay, good, it does help. Then I'm going to go +1 above that. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I forgot to mention that about the two purposes. I'm going to do this really fast, and then we are going to jump into culture, because I think this piece you can sort of, well, actually I might do one with my group and sort of talk with them as we go through. The last piece that you're going to look at, if you were on the web page where it had all the orange different things, and I had you pull up the grid with everything, as you scroll through those orange buttons on the actual page, you'll see by individual level. You'll see novice, intermediate, advanced, etc. When you click on each individual level, you actually are going to get a page that looks like this. And this is, you're going to get the same thing at the top. You're going to get your icon with your mode of communication. You're going to get your proficiency descriptor. You're going to get your function question. But this time, each page only has one of the function questions, and it gives the indicators for just the intermediate, low, mid, and high for that level. So you'll see that for every level. And then we give you the examples, because the indicators tell you what it looks like, but then it's like, well, what does it actually look like in my classroom? And I'm having a hard time reading this, so I can't really get it out. But so then we break it down to, okay, if my kids are speaking and signing at intermediate low, what does it actually look like in my classroom? What can they actually say, or what can they actually sign? Or if they're writing, what type of things can they write? You know, can they write a letter to someone in this time frame? Can they write a request for something, etc.? So this is a wonderful page to give you ideas of what does it actually look like? What can I have my kids do that shows me what it looks like at this level? The other thing you'll see that I have circled, every single set of examples has at the top, I can ... and customize with your own text. We put that in there because, as I mentioned before, this is not a curriculum. This doesn't say if you teach your kids everything on here, they are voila, they are intermediate low. This says this is what it might look like. But we want you to take your context, your situation, your once a week kids, or my every day for 3 hours on a block kids, or my college kids, and we want you to develop your own I can statements that align to what you're teaching. There's one in here that, like, because we tried to hit like immersion and real life and older kids and younger kids, and if there's one that says, like, I can name all the planets in science class. Well, you're like, I don't do planets, I don't do science class, but it could be like, you know what, maybe I'm going to do an article about the planets or astrology or something like that. Or instead of you saying, okay, I can name all the planets in science class, maybe you say, I can name all the, I don't even know, the clothing that I wear in the spring or something like that. So the goal of the samples is to show you what it really looks like, and then also to customize it. We had an activity, but I think I am going to skip it because I think we have a good idea. But this, when I send you the PDF, it might be something you do in your class. Usually what I do in my workshop is I give a topic, like, and we say, okay, I want to teach my kids about animals. So, and we go through all the, the 7 lower levels here that we typically teach, and we say, what would I do at novice low? What would I do at novice mid? And so I'm not going to go into that, but examples may be like, at the lower level, they can name animals in a zoo. They can list animals on a photograph. They can list animals in phrases and sentences. But so this is not something we're going to have time to do. But it's a nice exercise if you're taking this back to teachers at your school that you want to show. Go through this exercise and pick a topic and say, okay, here's the descriptors for presentational, or pull up the interpersonal and say, what would I do in my classroom to make it actually look like this? Okay. Also, if I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep going because we don't have a whole lot of time. But obviously, if you need to use the, use the toilet or the WC or something, feel free, obviously, to do that. I won't know. Okay, let's jump into culture, because I think everyone's pretty familiar with the language at least from what I'm gathering from my group here in their comments. I think the language was good, but I wanted to make sure we had the basis of that. So let's now talk about the intercultural can-dos, because that's a different ballgame. That's sort of like the step up. And what we sort of are telling teachers is if you've never used the can-dos at all, it's easier to start with the language can-dos and try and infuse them with culture. If you're like, I have been using the can-dos for years, I'm good with the can-dos, I'm ready for the next step, then we say just jump right into the intercultural can-dos because they're a little bit tougher to use, but they're definitely a step above. So when we did we call them ICC or IC can-dos, whatever you want to do, and we focus on the goals of investigate, interact, and reflect, which are right from the World Readiness Standards from ACTFL and from most states. And we focus on language proficiency and intercultural competence. So I'm going to give you about a minute or so, and I'm going to do it in my class in here, with my group in here. And in your room, I put some pictures up there that you don't have to use these, but you can if you're sort of drawing a blank. I want you to talk about what is the difference between culture versus intercultural communication. So take about a minute to talk, and I'm going to talk with my teachers in here, and then we'll discuss as a group. And you can go ahead and start putting stuff in the chat box too. So in here, what's culture versus intercultural communication? And if it's easier to start, this is culture, and then go from there if it's easier to try. This is a tough question. It's not an easy question. It's not one you can just sort of throw off the top. So you can think about it too. Or if it helps to look at the pictures.
Well, I think like intercultural implies like a combination, right, of cultures, I guess. So like talking across cultures. Is that like I don't know.
There's no right or wrong answer.
Okay.
Just, yeah, keep on.
Like maybe connections between cultures.
Connections between cultures, exactly. Like if we were talking about, let's take the Christmas picture up there. What would be culture and what would be intercultural communication with that Christmas picture? What would just be culture?
The tradition of, for example, putting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do what do they do? They hang stockings, or
Right.
there's a tree and there's a stocking, etc. How can we make that more intercultural?
How does that compare to your?
Exactly. What do we do in the U.S. compared to what do they do in France? Okay, so what do we do? And let's keep going. What else could you say about it?
Do you have a similar celebration?
Do you have a similar celebration? Maybe you don't even celebrate Christmas, which a lot of cultures don't. What do you celebrate that's similar? What else could you do with it?
So you might find a fact about what's happening in each culture and then ask, well, why do you wait until Christmas Eve to put up your Christmas tree?
Exactly, right.
Why do we put ours up earlier? It's a conversation around the practice.
Exactly, right, exactly. So we've gone from just sort of saying, oh, we do this and they do that, to, oh, why do you do this? And think about why, how come we, and then start investigating my own culture, like why do I do it this way, etc. If you have comments you want to throw in the chat box, I mean, we've got a good conversation going in here, but about what's the difference between culture and intercultural communication. Let's see, culture can be more personal, intercultural is between cultures, in which in my culture a gesture like thumbs up is good, but in someone else's culture it would be bad, right? Exactly. That one, the okay sign, I think is another one. There's a couple of them that do that. Any other things? Memorizing facts versus connections, exactly. Okay, so and we sort of talked about it here. In Christmas in France, they do this and they hang up this and they celebrate this and they eat that, versus what do I do that's similar or different to what they do? Other things, it looks like someone else is typing up there. A couple other people are typing, it looks like. Perspectives. Understanding cultural perspectives is key, right? Like we sort of mentioned that earlier, I think, in one of the things about, why do you do that? Not like, oh my God, that's so stupid or whatever. Yeah, let's see. Culture that relates to our own culture, what we do, celebrate, eat, comparing our own culture to another. This is great. You've got a partner. If you can get a partnership with another school, or if you have native speakers, that's a fantastic way to do it, right? How do we compare to it? Okay, I'm gonna look at one. I'm gonna keep going as I see some other things up there. Right, and I think you've hit a lot of what we talked about. So culture is the accumulation of knowledge. In fact, this is based on Cramsh and Nolden's studies. It's the accumulation of knowledge and facts about the customs, the history, etc. Intercultural it's the focus on the language and behavior to have engagement, to understand how the facts are related, to how they represent, like many of you mentioned connections, how they're connected to an understanding of the culture. Right, exactly. And understand how they tell you, why is it that way? How do they relate? What does having a Christmas tree say about our culture? What does having Santa Claus on in your front yard versus having the Christ child on your front yard say about you? I mean, there's a lot that a fact can tell you. Culture remains external to the learner. I know this about you, but it doesn't transform my values, my perspectives, or anything. Intercultural communication, it decenters me. It means, and if any of you who have traveled abroad, you know this. I was American, and when I went over to France and it was there for several months, I felt like a French person. I'm like, I really feel like a French person. But all of a sudden I came back to America and I'm like, I don't feel totally American, but I don't feel totally French either. And that's what happens is you have become more intercultural. They call it like the third person. You become like this third person. You're decentered now because I'm trying to understand my culture, but now I have a different perspective. You know that if you've gone over there and people say things about Americans, and then you go like, now I see why they say it because I see it too when I'm not in America. So this is huge, that it's no longer that it's me and you. I have totally, both of us have transformed into this whole other entity where we understand two different perspectives at the same time. The other thing is language is a conduit to teach about culture, whereas in intercultural communication, language is culture. So because the way I speak is my culture, formal versus informal. I'm sitting here saying, and I'm like, hey, you guys, and I'm being very sort of informal with you right now, which is sort of talks about American culture, which may not be if I were, in a university symposium right now, I would definitely not be speaking as casually as I am to you because I feel just, we're in a small room here and I feel like we have this informal connection. So language is not just something to talk about culture. Language represents the culture, and the culture influences the language. Like I was just saying, if it's an informal culture, you tend to use more informal language. So this is, I really like this chart. Like I said, I'll send you the PDF, but go ahead and take a screenshot if you want. Let's keep going. I have this up here. It might be too hard for you to read, so I tried to underline the key points. This is from the Spring Institute for Intercultural Learning, who does all sorts of workshops and everything on it. And they talked about the difference between multicultural, cross-cultural, and intercultural. And I really like this a lot. Multicultural means there's other things. I'm in a multicultural neighborhood, or I go to a different grocery store, but I don't really interact with them. Okay, I know I'll go in the Spanish grocery store and I'll buy some Spanish food, but I don't really do anything to try to understand them more. Cross-cultural means that I know there's differences and I understand them, and I might maybe a little bit start changing myself, but it is not a collective transformation. It still is that here's my culture and yours is another culture that's compared to my culture. It's still sort of a me and you, but I'm starting to sort of bridge it a little bit more. Intercultural, which is what we're focusing on, this is where it truly is a deep understanding and respect for both cultures, my own culture and the other culture. It's a mutual exchange of ideas. It's the development of deep relationships, and no one is left unchanged. Like I said, especially whoever's up there and you were talking about how you have a France school that you incorporate with, or if you've ever had an exchange student in your class, that exchange student will never be the same from having lived in America. And your kids in class with them for a year will never be the same from having been exposed to that student if they truly engage with the student. And that's what we were trying to do with the Culture Can Do's, and that's what we're trying to do with intercultural communication. We truly need to transform, because otherwise you're at these sort of higher, sort of lower levels, whatever, to truly get to the deeper relationships is what we're really going for here. So I thought that was a really nice definition, because those terms are used a lot, and I really like the way they sort of parsed out the difference between them. All right, this is about learner dispositions on the path to interculturality, which you're like, what's that mean? It just sort of means like, as you're going to become more intercultural, what happens to you? What happens to you as a person? So what happens is it addresses your awareness of how my personal perspectives and values changed. Because the first thing you'll notice, if you've ever done a comparison in your classroom with kids, especially younger kids, and you're like, let's do a comparison between, I'm trying to think of something, not like Christmas, but something more. We're going to actually do one, so I don't want to say the one that we're going to do or whatever. So, but you may say, let's talk about this or this. And then you ask your kids, how do you do it in America? Or how do you do it in your town? Or how do we do it in our school? And you realize that either they don't know, or there's 7 different opinions in the classroom, and you realize they don't even understand their own culture. or their own perspectives or why I feel this way. So until they have an awareness of how they personally feel about what's going on in their own culture, they will never be able to develop an understanding or perspective for the other culture. Second, let me put this up here. Curiosity, to be open to exploring it. And this is the first, actually, I want to put up everything. I have to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, curiosity. This is key. And this is sort of like, you know, when you have the kids and your learners and your students and you bring something in, they're like, oh my God, that's so weird, or that's so gross, or that's disgusting. And you're like, don't say that, it's not disgusting, it's not gross, it's not weird. Don't shut them down. I mean, you know, change their language, you know, at least teach them to say the target language, or, you know, or obviously, you know, say, oh, that's different, or that's interesting, and teach it to them in the target language. But that is the first step. Curiosity and noticing their difference is the first step to becoming interculturally competent. If they're just like, oh yeah, that's nice, and never said anything about it, then we have a problem. But when they're like, ooh, that's weird or gross or different, you know, like I said, change the wording they're using, because that's not very sensitive. But that's the first key. They notice something is different, take it and run with it. Don't shut them down and say, well, that, you know, we have to respect it. Start talking about it, and if that's what they're going for, take it and run with it. Even if it wasn't in your lesson plan, go with it, because that's what they're interested in. Sensitivity and empathy obviously is something that's a life skill. That's not just with this, but it is. It's like, first off, why is it not sensitive to say that's gross about something someone eats, or, you know, about, or that's weird or whatever? And saying, you know, you think it's weird that they do that. Well, how do you think they feel about what we do here in America? You know, that you're eating Pringles for breakfast. How do you think, you know, they feel about that or whatever, you know? Sorry, that's what I actually had in the airport this morning at 6 a.m. And I'm sure if I all right, sorry. All right, and then the other one we talked about earlier was to develop a decentered perspective and withhold judgment, which is very, very hard to withhold judgment. So not only are these good for building interculturality, these are just true life skills. If they never take another language class in their life, somewhere, somehow, they're going to interact with someone in our culture or another culture that is going to be different, and they're going to have these life skills. So if they're like, I'm never going to use this again the rest of my life, yes, you are, because you will interact with people the rest of your life unless you're, you know, a monk or whatever. Plus, they never know, when am I going to, you know, marry someone from another culture? When am I going to be transferred for my job? There's all sorts of things going on. Okay, which actually brings me to my next question, which I sort of started. Okay, why now? This is probably the most important slide of the entire cultural and the communication presentation today. Is keeping an eye on my clock. Okay, why now? Why is it important for our students and for us and for our neighbors and for our country and for the world, for anyone? Why is it important to be interculturally competent and that, you know, to use intercultural communication, but to have intercultural competence? Why is it important? Because if you don't have a fundamental belief to yourself about why this is important, why are you at this workshop today or this webinar? If you don't know why it's important, you are never going to be able to transmit that to your students, and you're never going to develop lessons that tells you why it's important. Because once you have that belief and understanding of yourself about why is this important to my students or to me, that will tell you how to teach your lessons and what to teach with your kids. So take a couple minutes in your group, and I'll do it with my little cadre here, and let's talk about why is it important for my students or for anyone to be interculturally competent. And please type in the chat box also as you're talking in your remote areas, and we'll sort of chat here. So what do you think? Why is it important? Yeah, no jump.
But I just think it's like so important, right? Where if we're not interculturally competent, we don't understand other people, right? So I think that wherever our students go after they're done in our classroom, they need to understand other people and their personal cultures. So that skill.
It is. It's just a life skill. What else? Why is it important? I mean, think about in the classroom, outside of the classroom, in the world, in real life, in the future, and why is it important?
When you think about conflicts, large and small,
Yeah,
so many
conflicts,
of which could be avoided if first we had sought to understand before seeking to impose.
Right, exactly. It goes back to the empathy and the curiosity and the understanding. Yeah, I mean, so many conflicts are just because no one took the time to actually understand what was going on.
And not just the level of war,
Right.
but conflicts that start at a very small one-on-one level.
Right.
That at first there was some understanding before immediately jumping to the assumption of whatever led to the offense being taken,
Yeah, it is. It's very easy to be defensive, and it's just a natural reaction. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's becoming aware that, okay, before Lisa said this to me, before I get all defensive about Lisa hates me and la la la, Lisa's so mean or whatever, I'm like, wait a minute, why is she saying it? It does. At the micro level, it keeps going. Yeah.
Well, I just also feel in addition, like as we like develop an understanding for others, like we understand ourselves better too. Like just like we were talking, right? As you understand other cultures better, you understand why I do that as well. So
Yeah, exactly. Let's take a look. I'm going to look at some of the things in the chat box because you're sort of covering what we did. Right, we are global citizens. Let's face it, with technology, there is no more, I'm never going to use French the rest of my life. Yeah, you are. You're going to use it somewhere, whether it's, my husband plays online poker. Not thrilled with it, but he's always like, hey, this French person said this to me. What did they say? You don't want to know. You don't want to know, honey. But it is. Those kids are online gaming all the time. They're conversing. You never know when you're going to run into someone from another culture even if you're like in a rural district where there's no one ever, there will someday, or like I said earlier, you could marry somebody, you could be working at McDonald's and think, oh, I'm at McDonald's, and guess what? They're opening an office in Paris, and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to do it. So it could be, as we said, we are globalized, technology. Yes, this one up here, more tolerant, accepting, connecting. It is because tolerance it's such an all-time low right now. And acceptance, it doesn't say you have to agree with it, but at least to understand it and say, unless it, obviously there's extremes to that, but for the most part, okay, I like this, you like this, we can agree to differ and that neither one is right or wrong. Because a lot of times what I think is right, especially in the US, we're usually the outsiders. We're usually doing it differently than a lot of other cultures. Our students need to understand differences, respect those that are not their own, become global citizens. Again, because you, with like I said, your career, you are probably going to interact, even if you never leave your town. A good exercise for those of you who are listening also is to go on to, like I know in Ohio, we have a place where you can research, we just Google investment in Ohio or foreign investment in Ohio, and it lists by the different cities, all the companies that are invested in your city and in your state. That's a great way for the kids who are like, I'm never going to use this again. And you say, you know what, guess what? We got a Nestle factory. Guess where Nestle's from? It's not from America. And so it's a good way for the kids to realize, even right in their own community, there is international investment. And let them research it. Don't you find it? Make them research it. The world is so much smaller. Communication is instant. Yes, and that's what Lisa was mentioning here. It is so easy to get defensive and start a conflict with Twitter wars and Instagram wars and everything. With social media, it is just a completely different world. Empathy, yes, we cannot stress that enough. Making an effort to speak the language in the country, because that is how you develop the relationships. Because, you can be like, well, I can just get an interpreter, when I'm over there. Yeah, you can get an interpreter who can do this up here for you. But if you truly want to develop a relationship, an interpreter is not going to be able to develop the relationship with you or for you. The same thing with the culture works the same way. I can understand the basics of the culture. If I go to France, I know I'm supposed to do this. Or if I go to China, I know this. But there's all those sort of subtle, nuanced culture that nobody knows about. I use my brother as an example all the time. He's an engineer who always, all my brothers are engineers actually, and they always make fun of me for taking, I'm in, master's degrees and I'm taking French, 12,000 or whatever. And they're doing math problems that are like 8 pages long. I don't understand you either. But he got sent to China and he developed projects around the world, and he got sent to China and he met with all the Chinese employees. And when he starts a factory startup in America, he gathers the employees and says, okay, I'm going to give you guys some time to come up with ideas and be creative, and what do we need to do to be successful? He said the first time he went to China and did that and got all the employees and said, okay, we need to be creative. What do we need to do? And they looked at him and said, tell us what to do. He's like, what? No, I want you to be creative. And they said, no, that's not how we work. You tell us what to do and we will do it perfectly. And so he was not prepared for that. And he said he had to totally rethink the way he was opening factories in China, because the Chinese employees did not work the same way that the American employees worked. And he said that was a culture thing that no one ever taught him that. And he's like, yeah, I had somebody translating for me or interpreting for me in Chinese, but they weren't able to no one ever told me that ahead of time. Our world is so diverse. It's important for students to understand our differences. Exactly. And that's sort of what we alluded to earlier. If you don't understand yourself and why you feel the way you do, you will never be open or empathetic or empathic, whatever the word is, to someone else's perspectives. And you see that in your class, even in your classrooms. There's a culture in your classroom, but there's a subculture and a sub and a sub and a sub, and there's those little micro cultures in your classroom. You have all those layers that you have to work through first before you can even go on to the next one. So you can see now why culture can't just be a one-off Fridays for 30 minutes. It has to be constantly integrated in the classroom as much as possible in the target language, which we're going to get to. But that's why, if you know why I think this is important. I think it's important to my students because I know it's going to help them in their career. Then I am going to develop cultural lessons, intercultural lessons that focus on how this could help you in a career. And let them tell you why it would help them in a career. Don't you tell them, what's your career? I want to be a doctor. How is it going to help you to know another language or know another culture? I could do Peace Corps. I could do Doctors Without Borders. I could open a hospital over here. I could work for the Red Cross. So pick something that they're interested in and make them tell you how is another culture or language going to help you. Oh, we're having technical difficulties. Looking forward to the handouts. Okay. So at any rate, keep this in mind. Like I said, this is the most important slide. Why am I here? Why is this important? And then when you know why it's important, that will change the way and what you teach in your classroom. That's key. Okay, let's keep going here. I'm not quite sure what that was. Oh, okay, I'm looking like, what is that? All right, this is just sort of a visual. So we sort of have the culture, as you all know, is the products, practices, and perspectives. This is a little bit off, I think, because my PowerPoint was a different version. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do products, practices, and perspectives, but we're going to do it in the target language. That's what we're working on with the culture can-dos. So, as you know from your students, and I'm, is that 5:38, 5:30? Okay, sorry, it's a little small. 5:30. I even have my glasses on. As you know, when you are doing language and culture in your classroom, and or yourself or in real life, whatever, you have sort of two different Venn diagrams you have here. You can have students who have fantastic language proficiency. You know, I can conjugate like a champ. I know everything. I got a 5 on the AP. My language is amazing. But their intercultural competence may be very low because either they weren't exposed to it in the classroom or they just haven't been able to travel or interact with native speakers. Their intercultural communicative competence is only going to be the middle where the two intersect. Like I was saying with my brother, even if my brother were fluent in Chinese, his thing of not knowing how to interact with Chinese people when starting up a factory brought him way down in his intercultural communication. It can go the opposite way. It may be someone who is well-traveled, they were a military family, they are all over the world, and they can interact at a pretty good level, no matter the culture. But if they don't have the language proficiency, they're only going to be able to sort of get that surface communication. They will never get the deeper relationships that are needed. Someone in another workshop told me that she had a brother whose family was in Belgium for 2 years, and they sort of knew a little bit of French, and they could speak a little bit of the language, but they really just felt like they couldn't connect with anyone. But the more and more that they learned the language as they were there, they said they became their two circles, basically their two circles started doing this because they felt they had deeper relationships because they could speak the language and because they understood the culture better. So that's what we're trying to work towards with these can-dos, these ICC can-dos, is we want to build language proficiency and we want to build intercultural competence at the same time to try and get the two to intersect as much as possible. Not easy, especially the target language piece, which is what we're going to focus on. All right, so basically when we were writing our culture can-dos, and these were actually the year before Lisa and I worked on the language can-dos, I spent the previous year working on the culture can-dos with a different group. And for everything we wrote, this was our focus. The learners will be using the target language to investigate, explain, and reflect on the relationship among products, practices, and perspectives of their own and other cultures. Like I said, we keep stressing that. It has to be my own and other cultures, not just the other culture. And that's tied to the standards. And the second piece is that they use language and behavior to interact effectively and appropriately with the other, with others in and from another culture. So we're using language and behavior to investigate, explain, interact, and reflect. That was what we kept in mind when we wrote the culture can-dos. Now, as we're talking, you see my little wall here. This is the only time I ever let teachers be negative. What I want you to do is, okay, we want the kids to be culturally competent, but we want them doing it in the target language. And, obviously probably going through your mind already, especially if you're in a classroom situation, you're like, okay, that's great, Kathy, and that's utopia, but my reality is this wall, and this wall, and this wall, and this wall. So what I want you to do is take a couple minutes, and you can put them in the chat box and share in your group, and I have you're not actually in a classroom yet, right? You're student teachers, or are you in classrooms? Sort of, okay, yeah. So what I want you to think about is, as you're doing this with your students, trying to get their target language and culture together, what are some walls in your personal world that are going to make this tougher for you to do? And just jot them in the chat box for me. And then in here, so I know with the exposure that you've had, what are some things that you foresee might be difficult to do this, the target language and the culture together?
Barriers that stop students from reaching cultural.
Barriers that stop you, barriers that stop the students, anything that could affect your situation.
With stereotypes?
Oh, stereotypes is huge. Yeah, you got to break down some serious stereotypes. Yeah, that's one. Okay, what else? Even if it's not with students, think of if you have friends that you're trying to teach this to, or other people that, you know.
Well, I mean, along with stereotypes, there's also information that they had previously that might be incorrect or might be correct.
Exactly. Right. Where are they coming from? What's their own cultural background about the other culture or their own, right? Their preconceived notions or ideas. What else?
From the teacher's perspective, sometimes they're not as confident in their own ability to communicate complex thoughts in a target language format that's comprehensive.
Right, so for the teacher's perspective, it's, I've got level 1 kids and I have this complex cultural topic, but how do I get it down into language that they can understand? Okay. Or do I know enough about it? I don't know enough about the culture to, I'm supposed to teach all this stuff about, Quebec, but I've never even been to Quebec. How do I do that? Okay. What else? I know it's tough with the student because you don't have a whole lot of exposure yet, but.
Yeah.
It's okay if you don't.
And there's, I think also, becoming an expert in all of the places that you have to know about.
Right. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna look at some of the ones up here. Right. Not enough authentic materials.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a huge one. If you don't have money, or you don't have technology, or I get the computer lab once a month if I'm lucky, or the kids just don't have resources, how do I get the authentic materials? That's a huge wall. Again, in the same one underneath it, resources available. Lower level language, right, ability and motivation. Really? No motivation with your kids? Yeah, exactly. So the lower level kids, not only, like Lisa said, how do I make it comprehensible, but how do they talk about it in the target language? And the motivation is huge. I think that's everything is so easy now with Google, man. I don't ever even have to leave my seat to know everything that it took us, and even with you, I've got some younger teachers in here. We had to go to the library and research. Now it's like, man, I got my phone, I got the world right in my hand. I don't need to worry about it. Dealing with students who are closed-minded, right? Exactly, because as someone in here mentioned, I don't know if you heard, a lot of the students are coming from whatever their parents tell them, or what they hear online. That's what they're coming with. Negative views of the target culture, right? Families, right? A homogeneous community. French is hard. Exactly, the language is too hard to do this. Religion, right? You got some barriers either about if you're trying to teach about religion or their personal beliefs. My own cultural limitations is huge. Like we were saying, Spanish, what do you got? What do you have? 20 countries down there that you're teaching about? There's no way you can be an expert in all of those. Keeping up with pacing could be the gender issue. Cautious about history, exactly. Wars, preconceived notions, preconceived ideas about language and culture. Staying in the target language, different cultural norms and biases. Yeah, lack of interaction with native speakers. Yeah, I love how when I have you guys put up walls, the chat room's going nuts when I had you put up barriers to all this. It's sort of funny, but it is. That's like I said, we're talking utopia. Let's look at our reality. Okay, so I'm not going to let you get away with that though, because I'm sure you already know what the next slide is. All right, so now what I want you to do is look at all the things in the chat room or the chat log here and think about things we talked about here. What are you going to do about it? Okay, because that's your reality. If, French is hard and, which I don't necessarily believe, I think Spanish is harder than French, having taken both personally. But, my reality is no technology or kids with huge stereotypes, or I don't have authentic resources. We have a very, community who is very, not really in tune with being open to diversity. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to help your kids break through? What are you going to do to help your kids get over the wall? If it's your administrators or your parents. So take a couple minutes and talk about it. Put it in the box too. And this is always tougher. What are you going to do to break through that? That's your reality, and that's what it is. What are you going to do to get over the wall? So go ahead and put some answers in the chat box, and we'll talk in here too. So what are you going to do? Let's pick one. Let's start with not knowing everything about the culture. What languages do you guys do? Are you all Spanish? And some German. Okay, so Spanish. You got all those Latin American countries you got to teach about it, and you got Mexico, and you got Spain. You can't know everything. It's impossible. What are you going to do about it? And this is just brainstorming. I know you
can just focus on one, right?
you can focus on one, which is a start. Yeah.
We could approach where like you're all learning together. Let's all share ideas and all share what we've been learning about.
Okay. So how are you going to get that? Because if the kid's like, well, I don't know anything about Venezuela.
I think that way the textbook can be a really good resource because usually there's a culture section and that can at least be a base for your knowledge. So you can expand on kind of, well, these are the main things.
Okay. And how are you going to expand? Let's keep going with that.
So I think taking, for example, if the textbook talks about like the tango in Argentina,
That's a good one.
yeah, and then you can say, okay, like I want to present this to my class, so let me research more, like show a video or like do something to expand on.
Yeah, make them tango in class.
Exactly.
That would be awesome.
I think maybe one thing you could do is you could leave the cultural aspect up to them, like you could assign groups. And each group can be assigned a specific country, and every week or every time you bring up culture, you can have that group present that way. It's a lot more.
Yeah, take the onus off the teacher. The teacher does not have to know everything. Especially, that is the one good thing about technology is, you got a smartphone in your hand. You can find out everything you need to know about Puerto Rico right on the smartphone. So yeah, you don't have to know everything because you don't even know everything about America. Because if they're like, how come you don't know this? You're the French teacher. I'm like, well, what do they do in Tennessee about this and this? Well, I don't know. I'm like, how come you don't know? You're an American. Put it right back on them. Because it's, you know how it is something. If the kids are going to challenge you, don't let them get away with it. But it is, make the kids, let them be the ones in carton, make them be the anthropologist, the one to research it. I'll give you a base, but then let's go from here. I love the one about the tango because you can start with, okay, they do the tango in Argentina. Let's look at the history of the tango. What are some dances they do in other countries? What are some dances they do in America? Hey, what about the Macarena? Well, you know what? Is the Macarena really an American dance? Or I don't know, is it? I don't know, whatever. So exactly. So it's great that if you take something that they're interested in and think of that nucleus where we took that circle and kept going, you could take one cultural topic and you could develop your entire year around the tango. Yeah. And that could be your final exam. All right. Let's take a look at some of the things up here. Highlight similarities. Exactly. Okay, good. I'm glad to see the chat box is also exploding with ways to get over the wall. So it wasn't just me teasing you guys about not having only giving me walls. All right, I lost my. Okay, here we go. Right, so highlight similarities. Exactly. That's so weird. Well, let's talk about what's the same and what's different. The 15th birthday is important for them. Why is the 16th birthday? Well, because I can drive. Well, when do they drive in that country? They don't drive till they're 18. Well, how come they don't drive till they're 18? Well, because they don't have jobs. Well, why don't they need jobs? Because they don't have to pay for college. And all of a sudden, you've taken this whole thing and you've opened up like 8 different topics just from the thing of why do they celebrate the 15th birthday instead of the 16th birthday? So that's the thing is you can take one topic and just keep going and going and going versus feeling like I got to cover everything that there is. Let's see what we got here. Video story from the target culture. Exactly. Yeah. Anything that's authentic, videos, cartoons, infographics. Commercials are the best thing, especially for novices. Think of a commercial, man. All you got to do is say, what's the product? Why should I buy it? And will you buy it? That's the purpose of a commercial. They don't need to understand every word because a lot of it is visual. A lot of it too with that is show them a commercial or a short video clip without the language. Tell them just watch the video and tell me what's going on so they realize how much I can pick up without the target language. Or play the language without showing the video and say, what do you think you're going to see? So there's great ways to do this if they don't have the language ability. See okay, you watch this video without the sound. What words do you know that you think you're going to hear in Spanish and you're going to hear in French? Oh yeah, totally. Seek out resources from other teachers. French, oh yeah, and on Facebook. French teachers in the US and Spanish teachers in the US on Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, join it just to join one of those 2 groups. They have a whole wiki of IPAs and lesson plans and oh my, like you could like never ever create anything again because there's so much stuff in there. I think there's probably, I know there's Chinese ones, there's probably other ones too. Lang Chat is fantastic. Hashtag Lang Chat, they do those. I forget their schedule exactly. Oh, they're winding it down. Oh, Lisa said they're winding it down. Well, hopefully they have them archived, maybe, exactly. Exactly, here we go. Encourage students to be open to learning about other cultures. Let the student be the teacher. Oh gosh, yes, make it fun. Music, songs, shock. Oh, I love shock or confusion. I think you're the first person who has ever said shock or confusion in one of my workshops. I like that. Or make it relevant. Yeah, because let's face it, the kids don't go into a language because of the language, unless maybe they're a speaker. Most of them go in because number one, my friend is taking it, or I heard the teacher's really cool. That's what gets them into the class. What gets them to stay, though, is the culture. Let's face it, culture is fun. That's what makes them stay, especially when you're in like that level 2 and 3, when they're starting to get bogged down with all this grammar and this language, like whoever said earlier, French is so hard. Okay, give them something, shock and awe. Give them something shocking and confusion, or songs, or lyrics training, or videos to make the language more fun. Oh yeah, love this one. Allowing students in our classes from those countries to share. Yeah, if you have an exchange student, even if they're not from your country, even if it's one day, you're like, you know what, okay, we can't do the 90% because we're French and he's German. So what? Let them come in and share the German culture and what's different from American culture. And even if it's, it's that isn't English, who cares? They're getting some culture out of it. Show, speak, live the culture. Right. Once students are in the classroom, they see their earlier perspectives are inaccurate, get them interested. Exactly. For most of us, that 50 minutes and that you have a day, or in the example of elementary, sometimes you get them 30 minutes a week. For most of them, that's their cultural exposure. You need to maximize the target language and cultural exposure every single second that you can in the class. These are all fantastic. Technology, interaction, if you don't have the authentic resources, if you have the technology, there's that mystery Skype exists. Can you Skype with other classrooms? If you go on like those French teachers in the US or Spanish teachers in the US, those are actually not just in the US, they're from all over the world. Say, hey, I'm looking for a French class that I want to connect with and do e-pals with or Skype with. Go on there and see if you can get another classroom. Do I have a native speaker? Does anyone have a family member? I'm always amazed how a kid will come in French 4 and say, oh yeah, my dad speaks French. My dad is French. I'm like, what? I've had you 4 years and you never told me this? So see what references or resources that the kids have. Okay, so that's the idea. We can't spend as much time as I'd like on that, but let's keep going. So we want to look at the culture can-dos. All right, so what are the can-do statements for intercultural communication? So again, they're the deconstruction of the culture standard: investigate, interact, and reflect. The same thing, it's communicative interaction within authentic cultural context, same as the language ones. They're performance-based examples, and so this one is not just target language, but it's target language and knowledge of culture to demonstrate their competence, which is what we've been talking about. We give a lot of sample scenarios for reflection in both the target language and in English, which this is a really nice piece that we have that I want you to see. And again, these are not a framework. It's not if I teach all the novice culture can-dos, my kid is now novicely intercultural. Oh, someone just put on, check out Flipgrid Connections, okay, to connect the class from around the world. Thursdays at 8 p.m. Thank you. Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern is Lang Chat. Oh, I'll be moderating on December 21st. Who is that? That's Warren County. Who is that? All right, cool. Let's see. Oh, Heidi. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Emphasize similarities. Ask the students why. Great. Okay. So again, it's a frame. These are samples. You adapt them to what you're teaching in your classroom. How do we use them? Again, if you want to go back to, I'm not going to pull it up, but if you were on that web page where the can-dos were, if you scrolled all the way to the bottom of the orange ones, you'll see ones that say intercultural can-dos. You can go ahead and pull those up if you want. I have screenshots up here also I'm going to show you. So the cultural can-dos, intercultural can-dos are a little bit different. They're only divided by the main, novice, intermediate, the 5 main levels. It was just impossible for us to break these down into sub-levels. So when you look at the intercultural can-dos, we're showing what it would look like for your novice learner. So whether that's 2 years, 3 years, depending on your language, it is by the time my student is a novice high student, they should be able to do the cultural can-do in the target language. This is typical of what they can do. And you'll notice it only has 2 pieces to it. It's investigate products and practices as they relate to perspectives, and that's your benchmark all the way across. And then we actually break it down to, this is how they investigate products all the way across, and this is how they investigate practices all the way across. And these are really nice because they align completely across at every level. Even the samples show you what it takes the same topic all the way across, which are really nice. So you have investigating products and practices, and then we have interacting with language and interacting with behavior. So when you look at these individually, you'll see that there's basically these 4 components across the 5 major levels, and that's how they work. The language is what we just did in the previous one with the language can-dos. So you now know, what does a novice, low, mid, and high do when you look at those language can-dos. Now we want them to use that language ability to talk about culture in the target language. Okay, so when you look at the actual document, this is what you'll see on the site. So you'll see across here, you'll see the, this is basically the same thing I just showed you actually. Yeah, so you'll see the benchmark at the top. You'll see the 4 products, practices, language, and behavior across. And then on the next one, when you click on it, oh, sorry, I forgot. The keywords as they build across, and someone mentioned this earlier, at the novice level, we're identifying similarities and differences. We're identifying things in my culture, things in the other culture. At the intermediate level, we're comparing things. This is what I do here. This is what they do here that's different, that's the same. As we move into intermediate, you'll notice the keywords is now I'm beginning to describe. It's not just saying I do this, they do this. It's like we do this with more details. And remember, you're using advanced language. So in intermediate, I'm speaking in sentences and connected sentences and starting to use paragraphs. In novice, I'm using words and phrases and sentences. In advanced, I'm using paragraph-length text on more complex topics. In the superior, they start to analyze, and then into distinguish, they actually begin to evaluate. 10 minutes. Oh, I got 10 minutes. Oh, that's not good. All right. I'm not talking fast enough. I'm just kidding. All right. So as you go into the intercultural can-dos, you'll see that you can pull them up by, I can't remember. I don't have it up. They're either all in one big document or they're separated out, but you can get them by level. So for example, up here, you'll see the novice, and you'll see again your benchmarks with, the interact, investigate, products, practices, language, behavior. And then underneath it is where you see all the languages. I'm sorry, all the examples. And what we actually did is we have 18 different, I hate to call them themes, they're more like topics that we thought are typical things. Things are like, they're like stereotypes and globalization and counting and time and schedules and transportation and families, all those sort of like those AP themes, but a little bit beyond that. So we took 18 different themes and we wrote an investigate, products or practices, one or the other, and an interact with either language or behavior for every one of those 18 themes. So it's actually about a 3-page document for each level. And then we put them together for you. So, and I'm sorry, I can't read it from here, but I know one is like, I can investigate types of stores in the community, and then the interact is something like I can interact appropriately when I'm shopping. So as you pull up each document, if you took the novice, and then the intermediate, and then the advanced, and the other 2 also, we'll stick with these 3. And if you line them up right next to each other, you'll see that it builds all the way across. So I don't know if this first one is shopping or not, whatever it is. The first one shows you this is what the novice does with shopping or whatever. This is what the intermediate does, and it moves up into like communities and homes. This is what the advanced does, where it talks, I think, about how our city's set up, etc. So this is a wonderful, wonderful document to sort of help guide you, because culture is tougher to do, and it's harder to scaffold culture. This is a way for you to see how culture can be scaffolded. These can be, you don't change the stuff at the top, because those are aligned to efficiency and everything, but the examples, feel free to mix and match or, change the words up to match what you're teaching. Let's see. You'll also see, this is just sort of a different one to make it bigger. Again, every one of them has that same thing. In my own and other cultures, I can, and you customize it so it can go to yours always. So again, every single can do starts with it for the investigate in my own and other culture. So I'm investigating Christmas in my culture, and I'm investigating Christmas in another culture. Let's see what I got here. I'm looking at my time. All right. This is an activity that we were going to do, but I'm not going to do it. So I think I'll actually just sort of go through it with you, but it might be one that would be nice to do with your teachers. Usually I'm gonna tell you, usually this workshop is a 6-hour workshop, and you guys had, what, an hour? So I think I did this once in 50 minutes, and it was, I think I tweeted it once. No, I'm kidding. All right, so what we usually do is we take, teachers match up by target language, and we take Independence Day in the US and in the target culture. And I take Independence Day because there's usually something similar in every culture, and most teachers don't teach Independence Day because it's a summer, in the US, it's a summer topic, and we don't always teach it. So I do this one because teachers don't have as much knowledge about it. And what we do is I have the teachers in their target language sort of self-assess themselves of where do I find, here's the different things to talk about Independence Day in my own and other cultures, and here's my language ability at the top, my language proficiency. Because remember that what we want to do is figure out where your language and cultural competence intersect. And I have the teachers go through and sort of see where does my language and my intercultural competence meet. So I might have advanced high language ability, but I may only be able to talk about it at a novice level. And I'm not advanced in my intercultural competence. I'm really sort of down at the novice level of intercultural competence or wherever they intersect. So unfortunately, we don't have time to do it, but I want to talk about what it might sound like in your class, because the question is, how do I do this with, especially the level 1 and 2 kids, and if you have like Chinese or Russian or Arabic, which are a lot tougher, how do I do it? So let's look at investigate for Independence Day. So we're talking novices, which are words to phrases to sentences. So in my own and other cultures, I can identify how people celebrate Independence Day. So if all your students can do is talk about words, and I'm going to do it in here, and if you want to type, you can type, or you can just sort of do it. If all they can use are words to talk about Independence Day, what are words that they could say? And we'll just do it in English, obviously. What are words they can say that have to do with Independence Day? Flags. They can name the flag, right? The colors of the flag. Fireworks. They can say fireworks. Celebrate. Mm-hmm. Parade. Exactly. Floats. You can teach them memorize. They can do memorized chunks of language. We have a picnic. We celebrate this way. And what happens is you start finding vocab that you normally wouldn't have ever taught. You're like, I don't ever teach the word fireworks or parade or float or celebrate. Oh, 5 minutes. She's done 5 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. So the goal is the thing is, this is another mind shift that I encourage you to try, is instead of teaching language to teach about culture, start with culture and use culture to drive your language. Because if I'm going to focus my whole year on teaching the different holidays of my own culture and of the target culture, everything I do, no matter what language they can speak, is going to revolve around holidays. That's going to tell you what to teach. So if this unit, we're talking about Independence Day, we need to learn the words for fireworks and parade. The next one talks about comparing values. And so they could even compare values at a word level. They can learn the words for patriotism and liberty and freedom and, independence and insurgents and unhappiness. So the goal is that you take the culture and let that drive your language. So if your kids can only speak in words and phrases, then all they got to do is talk about it in words and phrases. If they can speak in a series of sentences, then have them talk about it in a series of sentences. We are very, very expert at scaffolding language. We never think about scaffolding culture. And that's what the culture can do, teach you how to do. I don't need to teach all the holidays in level 1 and never teach them again. I can teach holidays for 5 years. And this is another time saver. If you develop, you say, okay, I'm going to teach 6 units. If you make every unit for every level you teach the same theme, you have saved yourself so much time. Because if I'm doing family in level 1, it'll sound like this. If I'm doing family, we have family can-dos up there. Family in level 2 talks about chores, sounds like this. Family in level 3 talks about relationships in the family, it'll sound like this. That is a huge, huge time saver when you're planning. Pick 6 units, 6 cultural themes, and teach all of them at the same time. Because then you find a great resource. I can use the full resource in level 4. I can use this paragraph in level 2. I can use this 30-second video segment in level 1. I encourage you to do that because it's a huge, huge time saver. Okay, I got like 3 minutes, and I apologize that we can't do this, but I have to show you the last piece. And then the second piece is you'll see the interact. Gives you ideas that either authentically the kids can interact if you have that ability, or at least you can at least replicate it in the classroom of things they can do. All right, target language versus English. As we wrote the cultural can-dos, the big conversation that came up was, as you're probably thinking in your head right now, yeah, that's great, but if all I'm talking about, if the kids can only do 2 years and words and phrases and sentences, they're not developing that deeper cultural communication that we talked about. They truly need to do that in English. And we talked about this over and over, and we're like, we don't want to go away from the 90-10 target language, because that's the only opportunity, but we don't want to lose out on the deeper culture. So what we actually did is we came up, I'm going to skip all this, these are just sample reflection questions on Independence Day you can look at later. We came up with a reflection tool, and this is actually also on the website for where the actual can-dos are. And this is designed to be done outside of class in English, or they can do it in the target language if they have the ability, but the goal was, especially for the lower level kids or a deeper topic, they can do it in English. So what you do is on the top of it, and there's about 8 or 9 scenarios. They go all the way from kindergarten up to like an advanced learner, all the way up into like college. You pick one of the cultural can-dos, and we give you a bunch of samples. You put the cultural can-do, investigate and interact at the top. You come up with what the activity is going to do that you do in class, like with Independence Day. Maybe they talk about ways they celebrate Independence Day, whether it's words, sentences, paragraphs, whatever. Then they go home and you give them reflection questions in English or in the target language, but English if necessary, that they can talk about. So questions may be things like, how do you celebrate Independence Day? How do they celebrate Independence Day in France? What's the same and what's different? How would you feel if you were celebrating Bastille Day in France or Independence Day in France the way they do it? How do you think a French person would feel about here? Because like France, it's a big military parade. Here you got SpongeBob and all those other things going on. How do you feel? What would you like or not like? And what would they like or not like? Why do you like it? Why? I know we're up. Why do you not like it? How? And then we always end with the last question is always, how has this changed you, or how do you think this will change you? To get that transformation piece? I know, it's fine, I know. So, and then what you do is you bring it back into class and into the target language again, and we give you tons of ideas. So the one outside of class can be an interactive notebook, it can be a blog, it can be a Google Doc where they type in English, it can be up on the screen where they're putting stuff up on Padlet, they're typing in English, who cares? You're not saying anything in English. And then you do some sort of follow-up in class, whether it's a Venn diagram for the lower levels or a T-chart or an essay or whatever. But this tool here is key. So we want to start with the culture can-dos to get the target language piece. And then this tool here is key to getting that deeper reflection that they need in English in order to become interculturally competent. And then you find a way with whatever language they have to bring it back into the target language. I think that's the big stuff. Like I said, everything else, yeah. This is just on this next one, and I'll finish, I know Lisa. The process of intercultural learning is what we just talked about. First, they notice things. Then they start to compare things. Then they reflect about it and think about what's the same. Why do I feel this way? Why does that make me uncomfortable? Then they interact trying to do it with the can-dos. And then they reflect again. How did I feel interacting? How did I feel Skyping with this other class? How did I feel speaking Spanish in the Spanish grocery store and eating Spanish food? This cycle of intercultural learning is another great way to sort of do your planning when you're doing the intercultural can-dos. So the rest of this was like, I had like 20 more slides that, yeah, we're going to get to those. I know the time is up, and if you have to leave, I know it's been a long day for a lot of you, but I am happy to stay here. And if you want to type in questions, I'm happy to answer some questions for you. But if you're like, I got to go, Kathy, I've been up since 5 a.m., go ahead and go. I don't know if you even have my email. Can we type my email? Can I type it up there? Okay. Yeah, okay, let's get rid of that. I'll put my email up there, and you can email me anytime you want. Okay. It's Kathleen.Shelton. Shelton, I can't read it. Is that Shelton or Jen? Oh, okay, we don't have that voice. Okay, I got Kathleen. There we go. Shelton. Still I got the cap on. There we go. Sorry. Okay, Shelton at. I can't read it from your.
Yep.
Okay, at education.ohio.gov. So Kathleen.Shelton at education.ohio.gov. If you can't get it, Lisa has it, if I didn't type it right up there or whatever. So feel free, yes, it is right, okay. So feel free to email me if you're like, I just gotta go, Kathy, but email me, or if you go to the ODE website, go to the world language page, my phone number's on there, you can call me if you wanna chat. But if you need to hang around and put some questions, go ahead, I'll hang out and chat. If you wanna go, I thank you for doing this. I know this is not the easiest way to do it. Thanks to my little cadre here, and you guys can hang out too. So thank you.